The grand ballroom of Kensington Manor fell silent as Princess Alexandra stepped through the towering oak doors for what everyone knew would be the last time. Her emerald gown, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, now seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the tears she fought so desperately to hide. Prince Edward stood at the far end of the room, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his ceremonial uniform. The distance between them felt like an ocean, though it was merely 50 feet of polished marble. His dark eyes, once filled with warmth and promise, now held only the cold reality of duty and sacrifice. The golden wedding band on his finger caught the light, a cruel reminder of vows that circumstances had forced them to break. Alexandra's heart thundered in her chest as she took each measured step toward him. The clicking of her heels echoed through the vast space, each sound marking another second closer to goodbye. She remembered their first dance in this very room, how he had whispered sweet promises in her ear, how the world had seemed full of endless possibilities. Now that same world felt like a prison, its walls closing in around their love. The press waited outside like vultures, their cameras ready to capture the moment that would break millions of hearts around the globe. Social media buzzed with speculation, hashtags trending worldwide as people pleaded for the fairy tale to continue. But fairy tales, Alexandra had learned, were fragile things that crumbled under the weight of reality. Edward's jaw tightened as she approached. He wanted to run to her, to sweep her into his arms and declare that love could conquer all. Instead, he remained frozen, bound by chains of responsibility that had been forged long before he ever knew what love truly meant. The crown that would one day rest upon his head had never felt heavier than it did in this moment. "Your Highness," Alexandra whispered, the formal address cutting through him like a blade. Gone was the playful Eddie she used to call him during their secret moments together. Gone was the laughter that had filled these halls during their brief but beautiful marriage. The marriage had lasted only 18 months, but in that time, they had given the world something precious: hope. Hope that love could transcend duty, that happiness was possible even within the gilded cage of royalty. Millions had watched their wedding, had celebrated their joy, had believed in the power of their connection. Now those same millions would watch it crumble. "Alexandra," he replied, her name falling from his lips like a prayer. He wanted to say so much more, to tell her that she was his heart, his soul, his reason for breathing, but the walls had ears, and their words would be dissected by a hungry media. Some things were too sacred for public consumption. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and unlived dreams. They had tried to make it work, had fought against the forces that sought to tear them apart. But the pressure had been relentless, the constant scrutiny, the disapproving glances from palace officials, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever they entered a room. Alexandra's fingers trembled as she reached into her small clutch purse. The divorce papers crinkled softly as she withdrew them, the sound somehow more devastating than any scream could have been. These documents, with their cold legal language, would undo everything they had built together. They would return them to being strangers, as if their love had never existed at all. Edward's breath caught as he saw the papers. Even though he had known this moment was coming, the reality of it struck him like a physical blow. His hands shook as he reached for the pen she offered, its weight seeming impossibly heavy. With his signature, he would be setting her free, releasing her from the burden of loving a man who could never truly be hers alone. As the ink dried on the page, a piece of both their hearts died. The fairy tale was over, but the pain would linger forever. Outside, the world waited to witness the end of a love story that had captured hearts and imaginations across the globe. The silent parting had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 years earlier, the story had been completely different. Alexandra Winters was just another face in the crowd at the charity gala, a marine biologist who had dedicated her life to saving the oceans. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her vintage dress had come from a thrift store rather than a designer boutique. She never imagined that a chance encounter at the silent auction would change her life forever. Prince Edward had been making his rounds, fulfilling his royal duties with practiced charm, when he spotted her examining a painting of coral reefs. Something about her genuine interest, the way she traced the brushstrokes with reverent fingers, caught his attention. Most people at these events were more interested in being seen than in the actual cause being supported. "Beautiful work, isn't it?" he had said, stepping beside her. Alexandra turned, expecting to see another wealthy patron. Instead, she found herself looking into the most sincere dark eyes she had ever seen. She didn't recognize him at first. Without his formal regalia, Edward looked like any other handsome man in his 30s. "It captures the fragility perfectly," she replied, her voice soft with passion. "Most people don't realize how delicate these ecosystems are. 1 degree of temperature change and everything dies." She gestured to the painting, unaware that she was speaking to someone who would one day have the power to influence global environmental policies. Edward found himself genuinely intrigued. Here was someone who cared about something beyond social status or personal gain. "You sound like you know what you're talking about," he said with a smile that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "I should hope so," Alexandra laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I spend most of my time underwater with them. I'm a marine biologist." She paused, studying his face. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "And you are?" "Edward," he said simply, extending his hand. When their fingers touched, both felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. "I work in public service." They spent the rest of the evening talking, moving from the crowded ballroom to a quiet corner where they could hear each other speak. Alexandra told him about her research, her dreams of establishing marine sanctuaries, her frustration with government bureaucracy. Edward listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood the complexities of environmental protection. It wasn't until the evening was nearly over that Alexandra's friend Sarah grabbed her arm in panic. "Do you know who you've been talking to all night?" Sarah whispered urgently, her eyes wide with shock. "Edward," Alexandra replied, confused by her friend's reaction. "He's really nice. Works in government, I think." "That's Prince Edward," Sarah hissed, pulling out her phone to show a news article. "The heir to the throne. The most eligible bachelor in the world." Alexandra's face went pale as she stared at the photo on the screen. It was definitely the same man, though the formal portrait made him look more intimidating than the gentle person she had been talking to. Her heart sank as she realized the impossibility of the situation. What could a prince possibly want with someone like her? But Edward had been thinking the exact same thing from the opposite perspective. What could someone as brilliant and passionate as Alexandra want with someone whose life was mapped out by duty and protocol? He had been drawn to her authenticity, her freedom, her ability to choose her own path. Everything he would never have. The next day, flowers arrived at Alexandra's small apartment. Not expensive roses or exotic orchids, but simple wildflowers, the kind that grew freely without cultivation. The card read simply, "Thank you for reminding me what genuine passion looks like." Alexandra stared at the flowers for a long time, her heart warring with her practical mind. She knew she should ignore this, should pretend the evening had never happened. Dating a prince was not something an ordinary person did, but something about Edward had touched her soul, and she couldn't shake the memory of their conversation. When her phone rang an hour later, she wasn't surprised to hear his voice. "I was wondering," he said, sounding almost nervous, "if you might be free for coffee tomorrow, somewhere quiet, away from everything." "I don't think that's a good idea," Alexandra replied, though her heart was screaming yes. "We're from completely different worlds, Edward. You know that." "I know," he said quietly, "but I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since last night. About the way you light up when you talk about your work. The way you see beauty in things others overlook. I know it's complicated, but would you at least give me a chance to explain?" Against her better judgment, Alexandra found herself saying yes. That coffee date led to another, then another. They met in small cafes far from the city center, took walks in forgotten parks, shared quiet dinners in tiny restaurants where nobody would think to look for a prince. For 3 magical months, they existed in a bubble of stolen moments and growing love. Edward showed her a side of himself the world never saw, vulnerable, thoughtful, desperate to make a difference but trapped by expectations. Alexandra showed him what it meant to live with purpose, to chase dreams despite obstacles. But bubbles, no matter how beautiful, eventually burst. The photograph appeared on the front page of every major newspaper in the country. It showed Edward and Alexandra walking hand in hand through Hyde Park, their faces soft with love and completely unaware of the telephoto lens capturing their private moment. The headline screamed, prince's secret romance, who is the mystery woman? Alexandra woke to the sound of her phone ringing endlessly. Outside her apartment, reporters had gathered like wolves, their cameras pressed against every window. Her quiet life of research and ocean conservation was over in an instant, replaced by a circus of speculation and judgment. "I'm so sorry," Edward said, when he finally managed to reach her. His voice was heavy with guilt and frustration. "I should have been more careful. I should have protected you better." "It's not your fault," Alexandra whispered, peeking through her curtains at the crowd below. "We both knew this might happen eventually. But knowing something intellectually and living through it were two completely different things." The palace's response was swift and brutal. Within hours, every detail of Alexandra's life was being dissected by the media. Her modest background became unsuitable origins. Her dedication to her career was painted as radical environmental activism. Her previous relationships, though few and innocent, were examined under a microscope and found wanting. The palace advisors made their position clear during a meeting that felt more like an interrogation. Alexandra sat across from a table of stern-faced officials, feeling like a defendant in a trial she had never agreed to participate in. "Miss Winters," said Lord Chamberlain Harrison, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "surely you understand the delicate position you've placed His Royal Highness in. The crown requires a certain standard of companion. What standard would that be?" Alexandra asked, her spine straightening despite her nervousness. "Intelligence? Compassion? A desire to make the world better? Breeding," Harrison replied bluntly. "Proper education. An understanding of duty and protocol. You may be a perfectly lovely young woman, but you lack the qualifications necessary to support the future king." Edward had fought back with everything he had. He threatened to renounce his claim to the throne, to walk away from everything if they couldn't accept the woman he loved. But his mother, Queen Victoria, played the card she knew would devastate him. "Your father is dying, Edward," she said simply during a private audience in her chambers. The words hit him like physical blows. King George's illness had been kept secret from the public, but the cancer was winning. "He has perhaps 6 months. Would you really abandon him in his final days? Leave the monarchy in chaos during such a vulnerable time?" Edward's knees nearly buckled. His father had been his hero, his guide, his greatest supporter. The thought of disappointing him in his final months was unbearable. But so was the thought of losing Alexandra. "There has to be another way," he pleaded. "She could learn. She's brilliant, Mother. Give her a chance." "The people will never accept her," Queen Victoria replied, though her voice held a note of sadness. "You've seen the polls, the comments online. Half the country thinks she's a gold digger. The other half thinks she's not good enough. A monarch needs the support of his people." Meanwhile, Alexandra was learning firsthand what it meant to be in the public eye. Paparazzi followed her everywhere. Her friends were harassed for quotes. Her elderly parents, simple people who had worked hard their entire lives, were photographed outside their small home with captions that mocked their modest circumstances. The breaking point came when protesters gathered outside the marine research facility where she worked. Signs reading "Not our princess" and "Go back where you came from" were thrust in her face as she tried to enter the building. One particularly aggressive photographer knocked her down in his eagerness to get a shot, leaving her with scraped knees and a bruised dignity. That evening, Edward found her sitting on the floor of her bathroom, knees bandaged, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since the media storm began, she looked truly broken. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I thought I was strong enough, but I'm not. Every day it gets worse. They hate me, Edward. They hate me for loving you." Edward knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. His own heart was breaking as he felt her trembling against him. "We can get through this," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "It will get better. Will it?" Alexandra pulled back to look at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your advisors want me gone. Your mother thinks I'm unsuitable. Half the country agrees with them. And your father." She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what she meant. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier on Edward's shoulders. He was caught between the woman he loved and the duty he had been born to fulfill. Every choice seemed to lead to heartbreak, every path forward littered with impossible sacrifices. As they held each other on the cold bathroom floor, both began to realize that love, no matter how powerful, might not be enough to overcome the forces aligned against them. The fairy tale was beginning to crack. and the real world was seeping in through every fissure. Despite all the obstacles, despite the palace's disapproval and the media's cruelty, Edward made a decision that shocked the world. On a crisp autumn morning, he appeared on every major television network with an announcement that sent ripples across the globe. "I stand before you today not just as a prince, but as a man in love," he said, looking directly into the camera with unwavering determination. "Alexandra Winters is not just the woman I love. She is the woman I choose to stand beside as we face the future together. In 3 months' time, she will become my wife." The engagement announcement sparked celebrations in some quarters and outrage in others. Young people around the world saw it as a victory of love over tradition. Older generations worried about the future of the monarchy. But for Alexandra and Edward, it felt like a chance at happiness despite the odds. The wedding was a spectacular affair that captured global attention. Alexandra walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey in a simple but elegant gown that reflected her unpretentious nature. The dress, designed by a sustainable fashion house she had chosen to support, was made from ethically sourced materials, a subtle nod to her environmental values. As she approached the altar, Edward's face lit up with pure joy. In that moment, surrounded by centuries of tradition and watched by millions, it felt like their love could conquer anything. The Archbishop's words seemed to create a protective bubble around them, a sacred space where only they existed. "Do you, Edward, take Alexandra to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" "I do," Edward said, his voice strong and certain, echoing through the ancient cathedral. When they kissed on the steps of the abbey, the crowd erupted in cheers. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the fairy tale might actually work. The newlyweds looked radiant, their love evident to everyone watching. The early months of their marriage were filled with genuine happiness. Alexandra threw herself into royal duties with characteristic determination. She used her platform to highlight environmental causes, visiting schools to talk about ocean conservation, attending climate change conferences, and working tirelessly to make a difference. Edward watched with pride as his wife won over skeptics with her genuine passion and intelligence. At a charity gala for marine conservation, she spoke without notes for 20 minutes about the interconnectedness of ocean health and human survival, leaving the audience spellbound. Even some of the harshest critics began to admit that perhaps she brought something valuable to the royal family. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of public life. When protesters appeared at Alexandra's events, Edward stood firmly by her side. When palace officials questioned her choices, he defended her with unwavering loyalty. Their love seemed to make them both stronger, but the pressure never truly went away. Every outfit Alexandra wore was criticized. Every word she spoke was analyzed for hidden meanings. Every gesture was compared to previous royal wives and found wanting by someone. The constant scrutiny began to wear away at her confidence like water eroding stone. The turning point came during a state dinner with foreign dignitaries. Alexandra had prepared for weeks, studying the cultural protocols and political sensitivities involved. But when she made a small gesture, reaching for her water glass at what protocol deemed the wrong moment, the incident was captured by photographers and turned into front-page news. "Witcher Queens. Protocol blunder embarrasses nation," read the headlines. The story dominated news cycles for days, with experts analyzing what the mistake revealed about Alexandra's unsuitability for royal life. Talk show hosts made jokes at her expense. Social media exploded with criticism. "It was just reaching for water," Alexandra said to Edward that night, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "I've been at these events for months. I know the rules. I just got thirsty at the wrong moment." Edward held her as she cried, feeling helpless in the face of such irrational criticism. "It will blow over," he promised. "Next week there will be some other story." But Alexandra was beginning to understand something that Edward, raised in this world, had always known but never articulated. It would never be enough. No matter how perfectly she performed, no matter how many causes she championed or people she helped, there would always be those waiting for her to fail. The pedestal they had placed her on was also a target. The palace staff, sensing weakness, began to push back against her initiatives. Funding for her environmental programs was quietly reduced. Her speaking engagements were canceled due to scheduling conflicts. Her suggestions for charitable Partnerships were politely ignored. They're trying to make me invisible, she told Edward, after a particularly frustrating meeting with palace advisors. They want me to smile and wave and never have an opinion about anything important. That's not true, Edward replied, but his words lacked conviction. He had seen the same pattern, felt the same frustration, but had learned long ago to pick his battles carefully, isn't it? Alexandra challenged. When was the last time they approved one of my proposals? When was the last time I was allowed to speak about climate change without someone editing my speech first? Edward didn't have an answer because they both knew she was right. The institution was slowly but systematically stripping away everything that made Alexandra who she was, trying to mold her into an acceptable version of a royal wife. Late at night, lying in their grand bed in Kensington Palace, they would whisper their fears and frustrations to each other. But even those private moments felt monitored, as if the walls themselves were judging their every word. The love that had once felt powerful enough to change the world was beginning to suffocate under the weight of expectation and tradition. The final blow came 18 months after their wedding, during what should have been their happiest moment. Alexandra discovered she was pregnant, and for a few precious weeks the world seemed full of possibility again. She imagined raising a child who would grow up valuing both duty and compassion, tradition and progress. Edward was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father. He spent hours talking to Alexandra's still flat belly, sharing his dreams for their child's future. He or she will be different, he promised. We'll raise them to understand that being royal means serving others, not just accepting their service. But the pregnancy also intensified the pressure to an unbearable degree. Suddenly, Alexandra wasn't just failing as a royal wife, she was potentially failing as the mother of a future heir. Every piece of food she ate was scrutinized. Every prenatal appointment became a media event. Speculation about the baby's name, gender, and future role dominated tabloid headlines. The stress began to take its toll on Alexandra's health. She developed severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. The constant nausea was made worse by anxiety attacks that left her gasping for breath in palace bathrooms, trying to compose herself before facing another day of public appearances. Edward watched his wife grow pale and thin despite carrying their child. Her laughter became rare, her smiles forced. The vibrant woman who had once captivated him with her passion for life was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed to be merely going through the motions of living. The miscarriage happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. Alexandra woke to cramping and bleeding, and despite the royal physician's best efforts, their dreams of parenthood slipped away in a sterile hospital room. The loss was devastating enough, but having to grieve under the watchful eyes of the media made it nearly unbearable. The stress, the doctor said quietly to Edward while Alexandra slept, sedated by grief and medication. Her cortisol levels have been dangerously high for months. The human body can only take so much. Edward felt something break inside him as he realized that the life they had chosen, or rather, the life that had been chosen for them, had cost them their child. The palace released a brief statement requesting privacy during their time of loss. But the speculation and commentary continued relentlessly. Some blamed Alexandra directly, suggesting that someone unsuitable for royal life was also unsuitable for royal motherhood. Others blamed the pressure placed on her, but their sympathy felt hollow and came too late. A few brave voices questioned whether the system itself was the problem, but they were quickly drowned out by more sensational stories. Alexandra retreated into herself after the miscarriage. She went through the motions of royal duties, attended the required events, and smiled for the cameras. But Edward could see that she was disappearing before his eyes. The woman who had once argued passionately about saving coral reefs now spoke in careful, measured phrases that revealed nothing of her true thoughts. One evening, as they sat in their private sitting room, a space that should have felt like sanctuary but somehow still felt like a stage, Alexandra spoke the words they had both been avoiding. "I can't do this anymore." Edward, her voice was quiet but steady, with a finality that chilled him to the bone. She wasn't crying or angry or pleading. She was simply stating a fact. "We can get through this," Edward said automatically, the same words he had been saying for months. "We just need time to heal." "No," Alexandra replied, turning to look at him with eyes that held a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. "We can't. This place, this life, it's killing me." It killed our baby. It's killing us, Edward wanted to argue, to fight to find a solution, but he couldn't deny what he saw every day. The woman he loved was fading away, and all his power, all his privilege couldn't protect her from a system that had been designed to crush anything that didn't fit its mold. "What are you saying?" he asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying that sometimes loving someone means letting them go," Alexandra whispered, "and sometimes it means letting yourself go too." They sat in silence as the rain continued to fall outside their window, each drop seeming to mark another moment of their happiness washing away. The palace around them felt more like a beautiful prison than ever before, its gilded walls closing in on a love that had once seemed strong enough to survive anything. The decision, when it finally came, felt both devastating and inevitable. They couldn't continue to destroy each other in the name of duty. They couldn't keep pretending that their love alone could overcome forces that had been centuries in the making. Sometimes the most loving thing to do was to admit defeat. The announcement would come soon, but for now they held each other in the gathering darkness, mourning not just for their child, but for the future they would never have together. Outside, the world continued to spin, unaware that another fairy tale was about to end. The divorce papers were signed in the same room where they had shared their first dance as husband and wife. The irony wasn't lost on either of them as they put pen to paper, officially ending what had begun with such hope and promise. Alexandra's signature was steady, Edward's slightly shaky, a reflection of their different ways of processing grief. "I want you to know," Edward said as they stood facing each other for what they both knew would be the last time as husband and wife, "that you were the best part of my life. You taught me what it meant to truly live, not just exist." Alexandra's composure finally cracked, tears sliding down her cheeks as she reached up to touch his face one last time. "And you showed me that fairy tales can be real, even if they can't last forever. Don't let them make you forget who you really are, Edward. The world needs that man I fell in love with." They embraced then, holding each other with the desperate intensity of two people saying goodbye forever. It was a moment of pure love unmarred by duty or expectation, the kind of moment that had first drawn them together, but had become increasingly rare in their life together. The palace announcement was brief and clinical. Their Royal Highnesses have agreed to divorce by mutual consent. They remain committed to supporting each other and ask for privacy during this difficult transition. The words revealed nothing of the heartbreak behind the decision, nothing of the love that still existed between them despite everything. The world's reaction was swift and polarizing. Some celebrated Alexandra's freedom, seeing her as a woman who had finally escaped an impossible situation. Others blamed her for giving up on her duties, for not being strong enough to weather the storm. Edward was simultaneously praised for letting her go and criticized for failing to protect his wife. But the most poignant responses came from ordinary people who had invested their hopes and dreams in the royal couple's love story. Social media filled with messages from those who had seen their own struggles reflected in Alexandra and Edward's journey. Young couples facing family disapproval, women struggling to balance career and tradition, men caught between love and obligation, all had found something to identify with in the royal romance. "You gave us hope that love could win," wrote one heartbroken fan. "Even though it didn't work out, thank you for trying." Alexandra left the palace quietly on a rainy morning, her belongings fitting into 2 simple suitcases. She had arrived with dreams of changing the world from within the royal family, and she was leaving with the painful wisdom that some systems are too entrenched to change, no matter how much love you bring to them. She returned to her work in marine biology, but now with a global platform that her brief time as royalty had provided. The irony was bittersweet. The marriage that had nearly destroyed her had also given her a voice that reached millions. She used that voice to advocate for environmental protection, with a passion that seemed even more intense than before, as if channeling her personal pain into professional purpose. Edward, meanwhile, threw himself into his royal duties with renewed dedication, but those close to him could see the change. The spontaneous joy that Alexandra had brought to his life was gone, replaced by a more somber sense of responsibility. He supported the causes they had championed together, as if keeping their shared dreams alive in the only way he could. They never spoke again after that final goodbye, but their lives remained connected in invisible ways. When Alexandra's research team discovered a new species of coral, Edward was among the first to congratulate her publicly on social media. When Edward opened a new children's hospital, Alexandra quietly made a substantial donation to its environmental health program. 5 years later, both had found a kind of peace, though neither had found love again. Alexandra had become one of the world's leading voices on climate change, her scientific work backed by a media savvy that her royal training had provided. She had never remarried, claiming that her work was her greatest love now. Edward had grown into his role as king after his father's death, ruling with a compassion and environmental consciousness that many attributed to Alexandra's influence. He too remained single, focusing on his duties with a dedication that was both admirable and heartbreaking. Sometimes late at night, each would wonder what might have been if circumstances had been different. If the press had been kinder, if the palace had been more accepting, if the weight of history hadn't been so heavy on their shoulders. But both had learned that love, no matter how profound, sometimes isn't enough to overcome the forces that seek to constrain it. Their story became a cautionary tale about the price of living in the public eye, but also a testament to the courage it takes to choose authenticity over acceptance. They had loved deeply, fought bravely, and ultimately made the painful choice to set each other free rather than continue to hurt each other in the name of duty. The fairy tale had ended, but its echoes would resonate forever in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not those that last forever, but those that teach us something essential about what it means to be human. Alexandra and Edward had given the world that gift, even as they paid the ultimate price for it. In the end, their silent parting had been louder than any words could ever be, a final act of love in a story that would be remembered long after the pain had faded. They had shown the world that some battles are worth fighting, even when you know you cannot win.